Security alarms are ringing as South Africa's Standard Bank and major Nigerian institutions like the CAC and Remita grapple with data breaches, proof that in the digital age, even giants are vulnerable. Meanwhile, the Kenya tech labor market has taken a hit as former Meta contractor Sama plans to lay off over 1,000 workers, raising questions about the future of content moderation and AI sourcing in the region. And in Nigeria's Enugu state, an ambitious education experiment is underway with the construction of 260 smart schools. But as the structures go up, the real test of scale has begun. This and more stories on tech and innovation in Africa. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Tech Tides Africa podcast. My name is Karen. I'm coming to you from Kenya, and joining me is Calvin, who is in Nigeria. Calvin, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. It's sunny. It's Monday, another week, another opportunity to build something awesome. So, yeah, I'm feeling good.
I'm trying to feel good. Uh, it's not sunny here, and I'm really struggling with the cold. But you know what? The show must go on.
The show must go on. Yeah.
Go on, and we're starting with a topic that I think I am usually very passionate about. At this point, I feel like I'm passionate about a lot of things. There might be a problem, but we're talking about cybersecurity and the financial space, where as of today there are alarms going off, a lot of data breaches happening. Standard Bank South Africa has disclosed as of 14th of April that they had a breach. Internal administrative systems were accessed without authorization, and they exposed customer names, ID numbers, contact details, account numbers. They have, however, said that the transactional banking system was untouched. It goes back to something that we have discussed over and over again, and that is as our digital landscape expands, the spaces for vulnerability grow. Very, very interesting. And I'm seeing in Nigeria there are even more accounts of breach, which I want to hear from you because I'm sure you're very well informed.
I mean, when it comes to banks and this area, you are the expert here. But yeah, it's quite interesting that there have been a number of breaches, especially because they have all happened within a short period of time. So Remita and Sterling Bank have had data breaches in recent times. So not no stolen funds were reported, but customers' data were stolen. Also, we had the CAC in Nigeria, which is the body that allows you to register companies. That was also breached in recent times. The Standard Bank also has experienced the breach. So it's been a number of breaches in recent times. From the outside, I'm thinking, does this have anything to do with the rise of possibly AI tools that hackers are beginning to create that is making these hacks possible? That's just one thought. Another thing that I was thinking about is whether breaches like this happen in Europe or America, places like that, as often as they happen here in Africa in the continent. Because over the last year or so that we have been doing the podcast, a number of times we have talked about cyber attacks, data breaches. It's very alarming for a space that I don't even operate in, and I keep on hearing about data breaches. Data breaches. It's very worrying, and it's a concern. I believe that's why in recent times we are beginning to see more and more countries in Africa tightening their anti-money laundering mechanisms and trying to create more fraud detection capabilities. But it seems we still have a lot of work to do. Well, what do you think? You are the expert in this area.
I think for me, the first thing that I notice is that they have breached banks but have focused on documents. They have focused
Yeah.
on data.
Yeah. Interesting.
Most focus is on the money, right? So why would you it's really a big question for me. 900,000 records exposed with Starling Bank Nigeria, but nothing. They didn't touch the core banking system. No money was moved, just data. So it raises a question. Is it that money was touched but we were not told about it, or is there a switch in what people are focusing on? Is it a test of AI, as you were saying? It's very bizarre because you breach a bank and you go for the documents for records. The second thing that comes to mind is I'm saying that there are investigations, formal investigations that are happening. And however, most of the things were privately done. They did not let the customers know, which, if I am not mistaken, is a violation of Nigeria's Data Protection Act of 2023. You have to notify affected parties if this happens. Now, I don't know if that was later done within the three organizations that were attacked in Nigeria, but I understand that that's another problem with data. And we're going to look at a story as we're going on in the podcast today on compliance. And I think data protection has become a big issue that we are discussing almost every day on the podcast. It's a very surprising twist where people attack a bank but only go for records and documents. That's still very weird to me. Yeah, that's where my mind goes, Kelvin.
Yeah, it is very weird, like you pointed out. And you just reminded me that they are supposed to alert customers to data breaches. And I do have a Sterling Bank account, even though I don't actively use it. And I don't remember receiving any notification that there was a breach. So that's quite interesting. The other interesting thing that I found out about the hacks in Nigeria is that it's one group that is claiming credit for these hacks called Bytes to Breach. I don't know what their motivations are, but it's interesting that all three hacks from Sterling Bank, Remita, and the Corporate Affairs Commission, one group is taking credit for this hack. So that's another interesting thing. So we'll see how this story develops. Maybe the truth will come out later, as it is with these financial institutions. But we'll keep an eye out on it because yeah, it keeps on happening. Moving on, coming over to Kenya, former Meta contractor Sama is laying off over 1,000 employees because part of it is that Meta has terminated their contracts with the company and it's one of their big clients when it comes to moderation gigs. So Meta outsources their content moderation to other companies, and Sama is one of them that has been used for a long time. And now that our contract is terminated, it seems they don't have much work for the moderators. And in fact, they are completely leaving the content moderation business to focus on AI data labeling. And I know in the past I watched a documentary about the challenges that these workers face when doing this job. I mean, type of work they have to do, reviewing highly offensive content like child molestation, murders, and I think from a user point of view, you see the bright side in a way on social media. You don't really see this heinous stuff because the content moderators get to them before we actually see them. But yeah, this is a very, very taxing job. And at the moment, they are suing both Sama and Meta. I mean, a $1.6 billion lawsuit filed by over 200 former content moderators. So yeah, this is one of those messy situations that it's the reality of our continent. It's the reality of the world because Meta is a global company that people do these very bad things. And some people's job is to clean it up so that the rest of us can have like a cleaner social media. So I don't know. This is a very uncomfortable topic. What are your thoughts on this, Karen?
It's interesting that the contract has been terminated and people have been let go when the court cases are yet to be finalized. So I'm waiting to see what will happen with that. I think, first of all, Meta has maintained that they need their contractors to be paid above industry standards and that they should be provided with mental health support. However, I don't know that that is the case. We currently have a union that has come up that is called the Kenya Union of Gig Workers that is fighting for fair wages, for accountability, for democratic labor standards. And I think that this is something that we needed because a lot of times when you look at the kind of online jobs that a lot of Africans get to do, it's almost like a sweatshop. It feels like we've gone back to those manufacturing days when you had to do all this work with no gear, nothing to protect you. It feels like that is the case, only that now you're seated at a desk typing or looking at things. So I do think that we have a long way to go before we can properly protect our people. It shows that even for those of us who work within companies in our countries, not many of us have protections. And I think that's the job of unions. And that is why people join unions. And I hope that there are unions coming up. And if you're in Kenya and you're a gig worker, please make sure to look at the Kenya Union of Gig Workers. Become a member. They have a lot of resources that could assist you. But because many people don't know this, then we are exposed to such things. There, however, is another thing that's showing up for this, and that is how precarious it is for us as an outsourcing sector. I think Kenya is becoming quite known for its outsourcing capabilities. The Philistines have done a really great job at that. India has done a really great job at that. And I think Kenya is following suit very closely because, number one, we have very good speaking citizens, English speaking citizens. English is spoken almost everywhere in Kenya. We have very good network, and then we have very resourceful people. They will go online, they will figure it out. So we're becoming a hub for this. However, it's showing an issue where a lot of companies, business process outsourcing companies, are reliant on one major client. And so we are vulnerable to decisions that are made in Silicon Valley, to decisions that are made outside of ourselves. And we have this supplier relationship as opposed to being an important part of the value capture relationship. And perhaps that's a conversation that needs to be had where we think carefully about how we can structure Africa's AI participation at the model level, not just at the labeling level. How do we continue to be useful past certain processes that we take care of? I don't know the answer to that. I think that's a question that I will just leave out there. But also for HR professionals who are in these places, what does it mean to have a responsible workforce plan for your people so that in cases like this, you're not laying off 1,000 people. Having said that, we are also living through a time where layoffs have become the norm, especially in the tech space, because there's just so many changes happening. So those are just me thinking out loud, a lot of thoughts, I would say. But I do think that there's a need for more unions to come up. And I do think that if you're working online, if you're a gig worker, if you're a remote worker, whatever it may be, find a union and join it so that it fights on your behalf. Because when you're working for companies that are not even in your country, how do you fight? You need a community.
Yeah, layoffs are becoming very alarming these days. It's almost like every few business days you're hearing about one layoff or the other. And there are already so many people that don't have jobs. So to see more people being laid off to join those that already don't have jobs, it's very worrying. Hopefully things stabilize at some point, not so distant future, I hope.
Yes. Now, moving on to some good news, exciting news. Enugu State, Nigeria, has launched what is arguably one of the most ambitious public education reform programs that is underway in Africa right now. They want to build 260 smart schools. They want to integrate interactive boards, digital libraries, science labs, robotic studios, daily meals, and uniforms for their pupils. And to show how serious they are, they have allocated 32.27% of their 2026 budget to education, which is the highest of any Nigerian state at the moment. And that's 30 billion naira they have set apart just to feed 260,000 pupils. They have done this in partnership with a Chinese company, Hair Group, through the Higher Tech Enugu, which is a subsidiary of the China group. They're to assemble 30,000 all in one desktop units with tablets for the students. They've changed the curriculum. Now, this is the part that excites me the most, that they have changed the curriculum and restructured it away from memorization towards critical thinking, problem solving, digital literacy, incorporating robotics, coding, AI, mechatronics from upper primary. And they have done this, they have started by piloting schools in the rural communities where the system has been the weakest. This, if they are able to accomplish this, I'm in awe of what they're doing.
That's a big if, I would say. I mean, it's a very impressive venture, but it's a very challenging venture, I would say. Personally, for me, when I was in primary, secondary, one of the things I struggled with was how the things I was learning would apply in the real world. And I don't think school did a good job of translating that. In fact, I know that school didn't do a good job of translating that. So you had to, especially for me at least, the way I was thinking at that time was that if I'm learning something, I have to understand how it would be relevant in the real world. And I know I asked a number of adults at the time to explain or to tell me, okay, how does this one plus one, for example, apply in the real world, and questions like that. I asked a lot of questions and nobody could really give me answers. So I was doing this thing where I was learning what I needed to learn from school, but I also had the opportunity to like read other books outside of school. So whether that was motivational books or whether that was science books, literature books, I read a lot outside of the regular curriculum. And I started to find some answers there. And then, of course, as the internet started to become more popular here, and we started to have actual data services that were reliable for you to access the internet, I started to dive into the internet as well. So I found answers along the way. But in this particular development, they are trying to give you all of these tools directly in the classroom, which is very impressive. One of the challenges would be, how do you retrain teachers that are already familiar with the old curriculum? They are very fixed in their ways. As an adult, it's quite hard to make big changes like that. So how do you move them over to start teaching these children this new curriculum? That's one of the challenges, I would say. And then the other challenge that I can see from the outside is funding. Who is funding this project? And yes, you get initial funding for the project, but how is this going to be sustainable? Because we are already seeing in the startup landscape that funding has dropped significantly over the last 2 years. And so now there's a focus on more sustainable businesses. So, how do you make this project sustainable? Would be my second question.
Yeah, I think it's as you said, it's a really noble goal and desire. My biggest question, based on what you've said, is sustainability. How do they sustain this over the long haul? How do you ensure maintenance of these structures that you're putting up? How do you ensure funding is continuous? Will it depend on taxes? Does the government intend on sustaining them in the long haul? That's a big question. The other question is, we already have, and I'm speaking this as I'm thinking this. I don't say it as fact. Perhaps you will clarify. But one of the challenges that we have consistently discussed is power, infrastructure problems, sustainability of power. Number two, connectivity is a big problem. So, how do you build schools that rely on power when power is consistently a problem in Nigeria. Now I don't know about Enugu State, which is why I'm saying you would have to confirm for that for us. You consistently have power outage problems, and you don't have enough connectivity, especially in the rural areas. Connectivity is still a big challenge. And then you add the funding issue on top of that. How will these projects be sustainable? That's a big question. And I think perhaps that's why you said it's a big if. And I do think it's possible, but maybe it will take a longer time than we would like.
Yeah, there is the noble cause and there is the real world implication. And that's why I'm more skeptical than enthusiastic about this because of the challenges we have already discussed. They have said they will use renewable energy sources like solar panels and lithium batteries. But okay, who does the maintenance of these things will be another question. And especially in Nigeria, I don't know about other countries in Africa, there is one major thing I have noticed over the years of like reading about politics, and I'm not an avid follower of the political scene, but I mean these things affect your day to day. And so one of the issues I have noticed over time is a lack of continuity in government. When a new government comes in, they kind of abandon projects that the previous government set in place. That just goes down the drain. All the millions and billions of naira that are poured into some of these projects are just gone. The biggest one I would say is the Obudukato Ranch project in Calabar. That used to be this big tourist attraction that people from around the world will come to check out. That is nowhere to be found for the last couple of years now. Tinapa, that was supposed to be this world sports and training facility, also abandoned once another government took over. So, and I can't list all of them, but there are so many of these projects that you see very ambitious, very noble, very valuable to the society, and even some of them were generating a lot of revenue. For example, the Obudkato Ranch that I mentioned. But still, once another government takes over, they completely forget about that project. They don't maintain it, and those are billions down the drain. So that is why I am not too excited about this. Yes, I know it's noble, but for me, it's like it's just another project that, if we are going by the trend you can see around Nigeria, it's going to be abandoned in a couple of years. So, what is the point? Yeah, and that sounds a bit cynical, but for me, there has to be like a way that this continues and it's not maybe dependent on the government to keep facilitating it. Then maybe I'll get on board. But for now, I would remain. Maybe I'm not even on the fence. I'm currently on the other side. I'm currently on the other side of it. I'm like, don't do it.
Oh my god. I do think that there are things that work. I remember when I was in no, yes, towards the end of my primary school, we got a new president, and he was the third president of the country. And before him, the president that had been there had sat for 20 plus years, and the country was just. And this new president, Moi Kibaki, he came in and he introduced free primary education across the world. And over a million new students showed up in school the following term. And that was sustained. But now we're seeing the new government has somewhat completely scattered it, which is very sad, because one of the things that we've been saying as a nation is that a lot of millennials in our country are very educated, and a lot of development has happened as a result of the free education that most of us were able to access for our primary, our secondary, and then highly subsidized university. Now, education has become so expensive in the country. There's a bit of a fear of what is happening. So I do think that there are some projects that, especially if you come in for him, he came in and he gave us Vision 2030. So it was a vision, and this was back in what, 2000 and what, I can't recall, probably 2008, I don't know, but we've seen a lot of those projects being implemented over the years based on that document. by different governments. So I do think that it's possible. However, I do agree that there is a precedent that has been set by many governments where they completely overhaul what the previous government has done. And I think that derails a lot of development. So let's see. We keep saying we'll wait and see. But for a lot of things, we have no choice but to wait
Yeah,
and see.
that's really it. You just have to wait and see. Like the case you gave was a good contrast because it shows a difference in the way things where Kenyan government went about that particular case. But Nigeria is a very different country. That's what I'll say. Um, moving
Yes.
on.
Moving on.
Moving on, Africa Tech is shifting from a hustle economy to a trust economy. I would say that we have always been a trust economy. A lot of things have to do with a lot of relationships are developed through trust, and over time you build more trust the more you relate with a particular individual, with a particular entity, and so on. But this is also now affecting the global funding that has come into Africa over the last, what would I say, 10 plus years. It's now over a decade at this point of funding startups and things like that. And on this podcast, we have talked about the drop in funding for some time now. But it doesn't mean that there isn't any funding at all. What it means is that investors are now looking for more verifiable operations. And this is shifting a lot of conversation to sustainability, compliance, and compliance is big one now because African governments are beginning to take back control through compliance. And one of the one of the other main trends that is going on now is AI, and everybody's having conversations about AI. But there's a lot of conversation that is happening around compliance, or maybe not conversations happening around compliance. There's a lot of compliance and policy changes that are going on. The conversations around those are not happening as much as the AI conversations, but I think that's the big one that people are not talking about as much. So yeah, let us start the conversation, I guess.
I think this goes back to something you said last week, Kelvin, which was a maturity that is happening within business ecosystem. As you said, we've always operated from trust, but now we're seeing a need for governance and auditability. We're seeing our governments coming up with a lot of policies that require people to be compliant. We're seeing AI making it a lot easier for them to follow and check who is not compliant, right? So as a result, companies need technology that ensures they are compliant, because a lack of compliance is now becoming dangerous for businesses. We're seeing fines are being made very clear by the policies and laws that are being built. We are seeing, as we are maturing, our startups are maturing, our SMEs are maturing. For you to find funding now, there are a lot of documents that are required. There's just a lot of maturing that is happening within the ecosystem, and that is my thought. And so right now there's a lot of thought on digital identity, transaction monitoring, AML tools, compliance APIs, audit infrastructure. And we've talked about some of this over the weeks that we have been discussing this year. Things like anti-money laundering is something we've come across, right? Transaction monitoring is something that we've come across. We're seeing governments like Kenya bringing in AI to track your income to ensure that you're paying the right taxes. So compliance is becoming something that has to be done because technology is making it so much easier to be tracked and to ensure that these things are happening. As we seek more funding, especially for matured businesses, not pre-seed funding, as we move towards that direction, documentation is becoming a lot more serious. So I think it's a mark of maturity, if you ask me. And I do think that a lot more entrepreneurs and founders should start thinking about how can we create tech for different industries that helps them be compliant automatically.
Yeah, that's actually a very solid idea, because as compliance continues to play a major role and we can see the data is there to see that there is more and more compliance regulation going on. So at this point, if you're building anything, especially in fintech is highly scrutinized. You have to think about compliance. Even things like clean tech are beginning to get some policies around them. For example, I can't remember the country at the top of my head, but there was a country a couple of weeks ago. There was a country a couple of weeks ago that created a policy that reduced taxing when it came to electric vehicles. So this would encourage electric vehicle innovation in the country, as well as other policies that we're beginning to see. So it's definitely something you have to think about from day one if you're building in Africa. And I believe there's an opportunity somewhere in there for somebody that is willing to take off that burden of compliance from others.
Yeah, and it is a burden. I do think that it's going to quickly become a problem that needs a solution. I think it already is a big problem that requires a solution. So definitely take advantage of that. And still on the issue of compliance, MTN and Airtel Nigeria have suspended their airtime lending. MTN has one called Extra Time and Extra Byte. And the suspension has been triggered by the Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Commission's Digital, Electronic, Online, and Non-Traditional Consumer Lending Regulations of 2025, which have reclassified airtime credit advances into formal loans that require registration and compliance under a new licensing framework. So, as a result, they have had to suspend that lending until they're able to comply with the new regulations.
I didn't Prior to this, I didn't think about this airtime and lending data lending services as lending. And that's the cool thing that you can do with branding, right? You call it MTN extra time, and then that's what is known as. Well, underneath that, it's really lending that is happening there. And of course, you usually pay a percentage on whatever amount you are lending. So I never really thought about it as lending, but that tells you something about branding. But obviously, there is a growing trend of a lot of fintech companies beginning to go into that space of credit. I think even Money Point has credit facilities. We talked about the big Alezo case that is currently going on with billions of naira in loans that are yet to be repaid. So credit is becoming a central player for these fintech companies, as well as telecom, apparently. So the FCCPC has decided to bring airtime and data lending into like that framework of let's know what's happening here. Let's start getting documentation on who you're lending to, how much you're lending, what are your interests, because a lot of people are complaining about some opaque charges that they've been seeing on their accounts, unexplained deductions. So it's now time to bring all of these services by these telecoms into the fold, and they are currently suspended because they were not able to meet up with the requirements for this, so they have suspended those operations. But as soon as they are able to disclose those documents, then I believe they will resume operations. So interesting development, I guess.
Yeah, I do think this is another example of a good regulation that will probably ensure consumer protection. That's an assumption, but I do think so. It seems to have had a lot of issues with several extensions, a court injunction, and I do think that this is normal for new regulations and laws. So I do think it's a move. I think we've just talked about compliance. It's something that we're going to continue to see happening. I think it's a positive move just for the sake of consumer protection. Also, for that pure thought that you said, most of us don't think of it as lending, especially because sometimes it's so automatic and easy. They've made it so easy. It doesn't feel
Yeah,
like you're taking a loan.
It's so smooth as well.
But you are taking a loan. Um, in Kenya, this has been taken on a whole new level. We even our M-Pesa has something called Fuliza, and so it gives you extra money that you don't have. So if I go to pay for something and I don't have money in my M-Pesa wallet, I have an extra limit of, let's say, 5,000 shillings that I can spend that I don't have. And then the moment I put money in my M-Pesa, it is immediately removed. But it's so seamless, you don't realize that you're taking a loan. So the branding and also the how do I say, the user experience has just been so seamless that it doesn't sink in that that is actually a loan that you're taking. So yeah, I very interesting, very interesting.
Fair play to them, really. But I wonder if, since credit seems to be becoming a thing in Africa, maybe you could use these records, especially airtime and data lending. Could this be used to build a credit record for a customer? That's one thought that just randomly came to my mind, because there's not much in terms of most people. They don't really use credit services, so most people don't really have a credit record. But could you build a credit record around airtime and data lending? That's just a thought. The other thoughts I do have is that for big brands like MTN and Airtel, they probably just have a lot of things going on, a lot of priorities that they had. So airtime and data lending isn't high up on that priority. So maybe that's why they didn't meet up with the deadline. And they would have to take out the time to chart a roadmap for the implementation that the regulator wants. So we'll see. I know it's something that a lot of Nigerians use. So I wonder what the effect of the suspension will be on a lot of people. So yeah, I'm very interested to see. Just like a lot of these other stories, we will see how it goes. We would see.